It was a humid morning in early August when the latest monthly employment figures were released. For most people, these reports came and went with little more than a passing glance. Economists pored over the numbers, traders adjusted their positions, and policymakers quietly assessed whether their strategies were on track. But this time, the data landed like a political THUNDERCLAP. The figures showed something few had expected. Only 73,000 new jobs had been created in July. That in itself was disappointing, but the shock ran deeper. Numbers from May and June, which had once painted a healthier picture, were revised sharply downward. In total, the revisions erased over 250,000 jobs from the earlier tallies. It was the kind of change that would ripple through the economy, shaking confidence in forecasts and in the broader trajectory of growth. For the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the federal agency tasked with collecting and reporting these numbers, this was not unprecedented. Employment data is gathered from vast surveys of businesses and households, and as more accurate information becomes available in subsequent months, revisions are made. These adjustments are a normal part of the process, ensuring the numbers are as precise as possible. But to the wider public, such revisions can seem alarming, especially when they swing so dramatically on that day. The reaction from the White House was swift, pointed, and unusually personal. Within hours of the report's release, the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics was dismissed from her role. The official explanation was blunt. The president no longer had confidence in her leadership, and the numbers themselves were denounced as inaccurate, even fraudulent. No formal evidence accompanied these claims, but the message was unmistakable. What had been presented was not to be trusted. The move sent shockwaves through Washington. For decades, the Bureau had been insulated from partisan interference. Its data served as a neutral foundation for economic policy, trusted by both major parties and by financial markets around the world. Economists from across the spectrum understood that without credible statistics, the ability to make sound decisions, whether in government or in business, would be severely undermined. Behind closed doors, advisors defended the dismissal as a step toward restoring public trust. They argued that the revisions, particularly the scale of them, had damaged confidence in the system and that leadership changes were necessary. Yet, critics countered that removing the commissioner was the wrong way to address the issue. Revisions were a standard part of statistical reporting, they noted, and there was no evidence of deliberate manipulation. By framing the situation as one of dishonesty rather than methodological adjustment, the administration risked politicizing a process that should remain above the political fray. In the days that followed, the conversation turned toward the deeper implications. If the integrity of official data could be so easily questioned, did stewards removed, what would prevent future administrations from reshaping statistics to fit their preferred narrative? The fear was not merely about one month's employment numbers, but about the precedent being set. Once the perception took hold that economic data could be influenced or suppressed for political advantage, the damage to public trust might be irreversible. Economists who had worked in the Bureau spoke out. One former commissioner explained that such large revisions, while rare, were not unheard of. They stemmed from the complex nature of data collection, which often relies on estimates that are refined over time. Seasonal adjustments, reporting delays, and new survey responses can all alter the initial picture. The goal, he stressed, is always accuracy, not political spin. But that distinction was not reaching everyone. Among supporters of the administration, the president's narrative that the numbers had been manipulated to make the economy look weaker resonated strongly. They saw the commissioner's removal as an act of accountability. Opponents, meanwhile, viewed it as a dangerous encroachment on institutional independence, a signal that even the most technical parts of government were not safe from political pressure. The stakes extended beyond politics. Financial markets, which rely heavily on accurate and impartial data, reacted with unease. Investors depend on employment figures to gauge the health of the economy and to anticipate policy moves by the central bank. If the credibility of those numbers came into doubt, markets could become more volatile, interest rates more erratic, and businesses less willing to invest. For ordinary citizens, the controversy added another layer of uncertainty to an already challenging economic environment. Inflation had cooled somewhat from its previous highs, but wage growth was slowing, especially for lower-income workers. Industries that had been hiring aggressively in the aftermath of the pandemic were now pulling back, and the trade policies of the administration were creating additional pressure on certain sectors. Against this backdrop, the monthly jobs report was more than just a statistic. It was a signal about the direction of the country's economic future, as commentators debated the motives and consequences of the firing. Historical parallels emerged. Some recalled moments in past administrations when political leaders clashed with economic data. But few instances matched the speed and severity of this action. To some, it harkened back to eras when governments sought to control the narrative by reshaping or suppressing inconvenient facts. The administration, for its part, pressed ahead with its economic messaging. Officials highlighted sectors where job creation was strong, pointed to infrastructure projects and manufacturing investments. It's hard to that the fundamentals of the economy remained sound. They framed the dispute over the jobs report as a distraction from the real progress being made. But beneath those reassurances lingered the question, who decides what counts as real progress and on what evidence? Inside the Bureau of Labor Statistics, morale was reportedly shaken. Career staff, many of whom had spent their entire professional lives compiling data with painstaking care, worried that their work could now be subject to political retribution. Some quietly considered leaving, fearing that future reports might be altered, delayed, or dismissed outright. Others doubled down, committed to preserving the integrity of the institution, even under increased scrutiny in Congress. Calls for investigation grew louder. Lawmakers wanted to know whether the firing was based on credible concerns about misconduct or whether it was a purely political maneuver. Hearings were proposed, subpoenas discussed, and the possibility of new legislation to protect the independence of statistical agencies began to take shape. The idea was to create legal safeguards that would make it harder for any administration to interfere with the production and release of official data. Equals beyond the Beltway, the episode sparked a broader conversation about the role of truth in democratic societies. Facts, once established through trusted processes, form the basis for debate and decision-making. When those facts become malleable subject to interpretation not because of new evidence, but because of political convenience, the entire democratic framework is at risk. Employment numbers might seem like a dry and technical matter, but they touch everything from interest rates to social programs, from business investment to household budgets. The public reaction was as polarized as the political climate itself. Some saw the firing as a necessary purge of an untrustworthy official. Others saw it as an alarming step toward authoritarian governance. In the middle were millions of Americans simply trying to understand what the numbers meant for their own lives, whether they could find work, whether wages would keep up with costs, whether the future would be more secure than the present. Weeks later, the controversy had not fully subsided. The Bureau continued its work under new leadership, and the next set of employment figures was awaited with unusual anticipation. Would the data show improvement, vindicating the administration's optimism? Or would it confirm the slowdown suggested by the previous report? And regardless of the outcome, would the public believe the numbers? In the corridors of power, some advisors quietly acknowledged that the reaction to the July report might have been too heavy-handed. Others maintained that it was a decisive move that sent a clear message about accountability. But outside those circles, economists warned that credibility, once lost, is hard to regain. Trust in institutions is built over decades and can be shattered in moments. The story of that summer was not just about jobs or about one official's sudden dismissal. It was about the fragile balance between data and politics, between transparency and control, between the need for clear-eyed analysis and the temptation to rewrite reality. It was a reminder that in a democracy, numbers are more than numbers. They are the shared language through which a nation understands itself. And when that language is bent to serve power, the cost is measured not only in lost trust, but in the slow erosion of the very foundations of informed governance. In the months that followed, the debate over the incident would continue to simmer, flaring up each time new data was released. For those who believed in the sanctity of objective information, it was a cautionary tale. For those who saw politics as a realm where perception is reality, it was simply another example of controlling the narrative. Yet the facts of that day remained unchanged. The economy had added fewer jobs than expected. Earlier numbers had been revised down. And the head of the nation's labor statistics agency had been removed from her position in the space of a single afternoon. The rest, the interpretations, the justifications, the accusations would be argued over for years to come. And somewhere, in offices lined with charts and spreadsheets, the statisticians continued their work. They still called businesses, still compiled surveys, still ran the calculations that translate into the monthly reports. Whether their numbers would be trusted as they once were, only time would tell. But for now, they pressed on, believing that the truth, however unwelcome, was still worth finding.